The Lightning Fart by Steve Lookner. Read for you by Aaron Tyson. Chapter 1. I accidentally vaporized my math teacher by cutting the cheese. Look, I didn't want to be a half-wit. Now by half-wit, I don't mean someone who's, not playing with a full deck, always stuck on level 1, a few pieces to have a full pizza. If you're that kind of half-wit, well, obviously you're not, because you would never manage to read this far. If, on the other hand, you think you might be the other kind of half-wit, stop reading right now and burn this book and completely forget you ever heard about half-wits, because being a half-wit is dangerous and gnarly, and it just might get you killed. Now, if you're simply a normal kid who's reading this because you feel like it, and not because you think you're a half-wit, then congratulations! You read for pleasure. You are now ahead of 99.99% of other kids your age. But if you recognize yourself in these pages, please stop right now and read something else. Something harmless, like Harry Potter. What? Harry Potter is old and boring? Well then how about the book with the teenage couple with cancer? Oh, you read it already? Well then try the one where all the dudes are trapped in the maze. You read that one too? Look, I'm not a freaking library. Just figure it out for yourself. Jeez. With that out of the way, let me introduce myself. My name is Percy Stinkson. Yeah, that's right. That's my name. And yes, I'm constantly being made fun of it. Fun of for it. Because apparently people think being stinky is funny. But it's actually serious business. And it might just get you killed. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Until a few months ago, I was a student at Yancey Academy, a school for troubled youth in upstate New York. I was considered troubled because I'd flunked out of 6 straight schools. The school said it was because I didn't try at all, but it wasn't actually my fault. I had a learning disorder called HADD, which stands for Homework Attention Deficit Disorder. Due to this disorder, I can't focus on homework for longer than 15 seconds. And if that wasn't bad enough, I also have another disorder, which makes me focus on video games for as much as 16 hours at a time. But even though it wasn't my fault, my stupid teachers and principals blamed everything on me. So I ended up at Yancey, which is where our story begins. One day in April, we took a field trip to a museum to go look at ancient Greek art. I know, it sounds like torture. Seriously, being made to do something besides play video games and watch YouTube videos. But I still had some hopes for the field trip, because it was being led by our history teacher, Mr. Brunner. Now, you wouldn't think Mr. Brunner would be cool, because he was a middle-aged guy in a motorized wheelchair. But he was actually really cool. And by cool, I mean he gave me above a C. The entire bus ride to the museum, I had to listen to this girl, Nancy Bobofit, make fun of my friend, Grover. He was an easy target. He had these 2 odd growths on his head that looked like horns, a weird wispy beard, and a short tail. Also, he liked to eat grass and chew on tin cans, and walk on all 4s and say, "Bah!" Nancy kept calling Grover Goat Dude, and kept asking him what farm he lived on and stuff, which made me really angry. Of course, it was really fun to tease Grover, but when Nancy was doing it, that kept me from doing it, which was super annoying. I wanted to make Nancy stop, but my hands were tied because I couldn't afford to get detention that weekend. On Saturday, the local movie theater was having a Lord of the Rings quadruple triple feature, where they showed all 3 Lord of the Rings movies back to back, and then repeat this 4 times. Luckily, my disorder did not affect my ability to concentrate on movies. So, I just sat there until we got to the museum. When we arrived, Mr. Brunner led us to the Greek sculpture section, where we gathered around a statue of a naked Greek god. "Can anyone tell me which god this is?" said Mr. Brunner. "Percy, how about you?" I had no idea. I hadn't done the reading for the week. Or for any week, for that matter. Is it Stupidos? God of forgetting to put on your clothes? I said. Everyone laughed, except Mr. Brunner, who shook his head sadly. "Percy, That answer gets a B minus minus, he said. As I hope most of you will know, this is Kronos. Now, who was Kronos? And why is he important? Percy, I'll give you a second chance. He could have given me 1,000,000 chances and it wouldn't have mattered. I still had no idea. I'll give you a hint, said Mr. Brunner. He ate something. His clothes? I said. Mr. Brunner buried his head in his hands. B minus minus minus, he said. Kronos, of course, was the king of the gods, and he ate his own children because he didn't trust them. But Kronos' wife had one of his kids, Zeus, and when Zeus grew up, he tricked Kronos into barfing up Zeus' siblings. A war followed between Kronos' kids and Kronos, and the kids won. Those kids became the 12 major Greek gods. Now there's something I'll use in real life, I muttered to myself. And why are you so sure this won't be useful in real life? Mr. Brunner had insane radar ears. It was almost like he wasn't even human. Oh, come on, I said. All these stories about the gods are made up. They're fairy tales about things that aren't real. A loud thunderclap shook the building. You see, Percy, said Mr. Brunner, you're upsetting them when you talk that way. He actually seemed serious. Apparently, Mr. Brunner really believed this stuff. Great. I was being taught by a crazy person. Although that wasn't such a bad thing, since only a crazy person would give me above a C. After checking out a few more Greek statues, which thankfully were wearing clothes, we went outside to eat lunch. Grover and I sat away from the others, next to a fountain where the water spewed out of the blowhole of a giant dolphin. The reason why we sat by ourselves wasn't that we didn't like the other kids. It's just that we get weird looks when Grover got down on all fours and started eating the grass. I was about to unwrap my sandwich when Nancy Boba Fett appeared in front of Grover. Hey, go, dude. I bought you something at the snack bar, she said, and then dumped a handful of grass on Grover's head. I tried to stay cool, but then the next thing I knew, Nancy was sitting in the fountain on top of the dolphin and soaking wet, with the grass she dumped on Grover stuffed up her nose. I wondered how she got there. Then I heard some of the kids whispering. Did you see? The dolphin farted, and it totally blew her into the fountain. The dolphin statue farted and blew her into the fountain? It sounded unlikely, to say the least. These must have been the kids with that cold that was going around, and they'd accidentally taken too much cough syrup, which caused them to hallucinate. While I didn't remember putting Nancy into the fountain, it was the only logical explanation. I must have gotten scary at her that I blacked out while doing it. Whatever happened, I was going to be in trouble. Percy Stinkson, said Mrs. Dodds, the icky old math teacher with pink hair who was chaperoning the field trip. You come with me. Mrs. Dodds led me back into the museum, where I figured I had to spend the rest of lunch period writing a boring essay on the Kronos sculpture. But instead of going to the Greek sculpture gallery, she took me into a gallery with no one else in it and just stared at me. You really thought we'd never find out, said Mrs. Dodds. Uh-oh. This was the day I dread my entire life. The day my teachers found out there was no such thing as a homework attention deficit disorder, and that all my difficulties in school were entirely due to me being lazy. Sorry, I should try harder, I said. But look at it this way. If you add up all the homework I didn't do, I saved you hours and hours of grading. But Mrs. Dodds wasn't listening. Instead, she was transforming. From her back sprouted large leathery wings. Her fingernails became claws. Her pink hair grew into a coat of fur. And as she smiled her evil smile, I could see now that she had razor-sharp fangs. Whoa! Sorry. I didn't know you liked graying so much, I said. Mrs. Dodds let out a loud screech and started stalking towards me. Security? I said. But there were no guards to be found. Even though there was a human-sized bat monster in the middle of the gallery, I will never again be surprised when I read about an art thief. I was about seconds away from being eaten by my math teacher when Mr. Brunner ran into the gallery. Hey, Percy! Catch! He said, and threw me a pen. What was I supposed to do with a pen? Mr. Burns signaled for me to take the cover off. I did, and the pen transformed into a pen without a cover on it. Dagnabbit! I could have sworn it was the right pen, said Mr. Brunner, frantically checking his pockets. There was no escape now. Prepare to die, Stinkson, said Mrs. Dodds, and she flapped her wings and flew right at me. So I did what I always did when I got really nervous. I farted. Mrs. Dodds was just millimeters from me when she smelled what I'd done, and her face contorted into horror. She gagged and veered away and flew right into the sword of a nearby statue. The sword pierced through her body, and she exploded into white powder, leaving nothing but her chaperone badge. I looked back towards Mr. Brunner, but he was gone. Okay, that couldn't have just happened, I thought. Maybe I'd taken too much cough syrup last night. I walked back outside, still trembling from my probably imagined fight with Mrs. Dodds. The museum staff had got Nancy out of the fountain and were using a chisel to pry the grass out of her nose. Hey, I hope Mrs. Kerr gave you a Zeus-style butt-whooping, said Nancy. Mrs. Kerr? I said. Who's that? But Nancy couldn't hear me, because it turns out her ears were stuffed with grass too. I walked over to Grover. Hey Grover, who's Mrs. Kerr? I asked. Our math teacher. Duh, he said. But Mrs. Dodds is our math teacher. Who? He said. We don't have a teacher named Mrs. Dodds. Everyone must be playing a practical joke on me, I thought. But then I spotted Mr. Brunner. Surely he'd confirmed that Mrs. Dodds was our math teacher. But before I could even say anything to him, he saw me and said, Oh, thank heavens you found my pen. Mrs. Kerr and I have been looking all over for it. Then I noticed that standing next to him was a woman I'd never seen before, wearing a badge that said, Chaperone, Mrs. Kerr. This can't be happening, I thought. It had to be the cough syrup. It made me forget about Mrs. Kerr and hallucinate at being attacked by Mrs. Dodds. I'd made the entire thing up, for all they know. At least that's what I thought until I sat down to finish lunch. I took a bite of my apple and immediately got the annoying feeling of there being a hair in my mouth. I reached out inside my mouth and searched around, and finally I found the hair and pulled it out. It was bright pink. Chapter 2. 3 old ladies knit the underwear of death. For the next few weeks, things were really weird. Everyone at school kept saying that there was never a Mrs. Dodds, but I knew there had been Mrs. Dodds, and that she'd attacked me. Also, people were farting way more than usual. But I just tried to roll with it, hoping that one day I'd wake up and everything would be back to normal. I didn't have much time to worry about it anyway, because final exams were approaching, and they were going to be a major issue. To keep my scholarship to Yancey, I needed to get at least a 1 B- or above, and I'd been counting on an easy B- from Mr. Brunner. But Mr. Brunner had recently informed me that his standards for the final exam would be higher than for the rest of the year, and that I had to actually study if I wanted to get my B-. The day before Mr. Brunner's final, I sat on my bed with my Cambridge Guide to the Greek Gods, trying to study, but it wasn't working. I couldn't spend another second trying to take the plastic off the new book and open it. Finally, I chucked the book across the room. I had to face reality. There was no way I was getting a B- without some help. So I did the thing students do when they're too lazy to study, but want to make themselves feel like they've been doing something. I went to Mr. Brunner's office hours. For the week before the final, Mr. Brunner sat in his office from 3 to 5 every day, and anyone who could come and ask him questions. I headed over to Mr. Brunner's office, but when I was just a few steps outside the door, I heard Grover talking inside to Mr. Brunner, and they were talking about me. You really think it's true? Said Grover. He defeated Mrs. Dodds with his fart, said Mr. Brunner. Only one god could give him that kind of power. I guess you're right, said Grover. And also, that would explain why he farted 30 times on the bus ride to school the other day. What? Was 30 farts out of the ordinary? My personal record on the ride to school was 72. We can't tell him yet, said Mr. Brunner. But we have to, said Grover. The summer solstice deadline is approaching, and we need his help. He's not ready yet, said Mr. Brunner. For now, let's just concern ourselves with keeping him alive. Keeping him alive? Was my life in danger? Hearing this made me nervous. So, of course, I farted. It was such a loud fart that it rattled the walls, which wasn't that unusual for my farts. Mr. Brunner's office went silent, and a large shadow appeared in the window on the office door. A shadow much taller than a human. The door started to open, so I dashed into another office and hid under a desk. A couple of seconds later, I heard a slow clop, 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 and peeked out the doorway to see the 4 hooves. No one's here, said Mr. Brunner's voice from the hall. Dude, just admit it was you who farted, said Grover. He who smelt it, dealt it, said Mr. Brunner. The hooves clopped back to the office, and the argument about who farted continued. As soon as I heard the door close, I ran away. When I got back into my dorm, questions filled my head. What was it they couldn't tell me? Why were they worried about keeping me alive? Was Mr. Brunner keeping a horse in his office? If so, had he trained it to grade quizzes? I couldn't let those questions distract me. However, because the final exam was tomorrow, so I put the questions aside, played video games for 6 hours, and went to bed. The next day, as I was walking out of that final, my eyes swimming with all the white space on the answers I left blank on this test, Mr. Brunner called me back inside. Percy, he said, flipping through my largely blank exam. I think we both know you're going to lose your scholarship. But I just wanted to tell you that you shouldn't worry too much about this. Yancey just isn't the right place for you. Because I have special powers? I asked. No, because you're such a terrible student that there's literally no school that's right for you, he said. But who knows? Maybe there are other reasons too. I headed back to my dorm room and packed my bags with dread. Now I was going to have to go back to New York City and tell Mom I lost my scholarship. And on top of that, I'd have to find a job for the summer. I wondered if there were any jobs that involved playing video games and doing nothing. I walked out of Yancey Academy without even turning to wave goodbye and headed to the train station, where I boarded my train to Manhattan. A minute later, I was surprised to see Grover get on the same train and sit down right next to me. Percy, what a nice surprise, he said. Yeah, right. Grover claimed he'd coincidentally booked a ticket on the same train, but it was obvious this was more than a coincidence, and that Grover was one of those friends who wants to hang around all the time. That's when it stopped being your friend and started being creepy. I initially planned on giving Grover the silent treatment during the bus ride, hoping he'd get the message. But I was starting to get more info about what he said, and him and Mr. Brunner were discussing in Brunner's office. So I finally said something. Can you believe the summer solstice deadline's right around the corner? I said. Grover's eyes went wide. I have no idea what you're talking about, he said. Also, I never told Mr. Brunner that we needed you to help us, and Mr. Brunner never told me we had to worry about keeping you alive. Grover, you're a really bad liar, I said. He sighed sadly and took a bite out of the seat upholstery. Look, Percy, the truth is, I kind of have this job to protect you. Oh, boy. Not only was he stalking me, he thought he was protecting me. If I didn't cut this off now, this one was going to be a 24/7 stalk fest. Thanks for your concern, I said. But I don't need any extra protection. I'll be perfectly fine on my own. Then please just take this, said Grover, handing me a business card. If you need me anytime during the summer, just call. I looked down the card. G-Man, professional massage, serving gods, humans, and goats. 1555, touch me. And this is supposed to protect me how? I asked. Grover looked at the card and quickly snatched it back. Sorry, wrong card, he said, and handed me another one. Grover Underwood, keeper, Halfwood Island, Halfwood Hill, Long Island, New York. 1555, touch me. I still don't get it, I said. What exactly are you supposed to be protecting me from? Suddenly, there was a loud grinding noise beneath our feet, and the train slowed to a halt. The conductor came on the intercom. Sorry, folks. There's going to be a slight delay while we checked out the issue with the train. We all sat looking out the windows as they inspected the train. There wasn't much around, except the house across the tracks with 3 old ladies sitting on the porch. I looked more closely at the old ladies and saw that they were knitting a single pair of Frozen-themed underwear, which had Elsa, Olaf, and all the other characters on it. In general, I didn't mind all the different Frozen products, but this seemed to be taking it a little too far. One of the old ladies then took out a huge pair of gold scissors. I looked right at me, and cut the thread that was being used to knit the underwear. And I swear I could hear that snip from inside the train. Percy, were those old women looking at you? Said Grover. I nodded. Please tell me you didn't see them cut the thread. I said I had. All of the color went out of Grover's face. That means something very bad's gonna happen, he said. What? Is someone gonna have to wear Frozen underwear? No, said Grover. Someone's gonna die. I breathed a sigh of relief. I'd rather die than wear Frozen underwear. Chapter 3. I learned bullfighting. Or should I say, bullfarting. Eventually, they fixed the train, and an hour later, we arrived in New York City. Confession time? I told Grover I'd share a cab with him to the Upper East Side, but I ditched him when he went to the bathroom. I know, it was rude, but the dude was freaking me out. Not only was he stalking me, but during the train ride, he eaten all the fabric on the seat in front of us. It was time to bounce. I walked outside the train station and called a cab to 94th Street. I was really hoping my mom would be home from work when I got there. My mom is awesome. She's like the best mom ever. She just has one tiny problem, though. She's not very good at choosing husbands. My mom's first husband, my dad, took off when I was 6 weeks old. Whenever I asked my mom about him, she changed the subject. I didn't blame her. I'd want to change the subject too, if I'd married such a loser. Husband number 2, the current husband, was this guy named Gabe Ugliano. As far as I could tell, Gabe's selling points were that he was fat, smelly, didn't work, played fantasy football all day, liked to order my mom around, and hated me. Great choice, Mom! When I got to the apartment, I was disappointed to find my mom wasn't there. Just Gabe in his living room as usual, watching football as usual, and using my laptop to manage his fantasy football team as usual. Gabe didn't say hi, so I kept walking past him. Hey! He shouted, and held out a bowl shaped like a football. Aren't you forgetting something? Every time I came home, even if I'd only been out for a few minutes, Gabe made me give a donation to the fantasy football gods. Gabe said if everyone in the house didn't regularly donate to the fantasy football gods, the gods wouldn't let his team win. I knew I was actually just donating to the Gabe Ugliano Snacks Fund, but I really didn't have a choice. So I put a couple bucks in the bowl and moved on. I felt kind of sweaty and gross from the train ride, so I figured I'd take a shower. But when I went to the bathroom, I was completely overwhelmed by the smell. Now, when I said that Gabe was smelly, I wasn't really doing him justice. Gabe has the particular distinction of making the bathroom smell worse than any human being alive. Not only is the smell so awful as to clear out every living thing within a 50-foot radius, but the smell persists. It's like the smoke from a fireplace. Once you get it on you, it takes a week to go away. I decided the shower could wait and head back to my room. When I walked in, Mom was there waiting for me. Percy, she said and gave me a giant hug. Oh my gosh, you must have grown 3 inches since winter break. I started to tell her the bad news about losing my scholarship, but she cut me off. We can talk about it later, she said, but right now, I have a big surprise. We're going to the beach, you and me. When? I said. Now, she said. Sally! Came Gabe's annoying voice from the living room. Where's the 7-layer bean dip? The fantasy football gods are hungry! Mom rolled her eyes. By now, I mean, we'll leave right after I make him his bean dip, she said. Mom, I've always wondered, what are the 7 layers in the dip? I can't tell you because it's a secret recipe, she said, but I can tell you that layers 1, 3, and 6 are spit. A half hour later, Mom and I had loaded our luggage into Gabe's car and were standing with Gabe in the driveway. Remember, said Gabe, you'll need to refill the gas to the level it's at now before returning the car, or you'll incur a $100 penalty. Got it, said Mom. She went to hug him goodbye, but he had already started walking back inside. What a jerk, I thought, and as a small protest, I turned my back to him and farted. I didn't think the fart would actually be noticeable, but right when I farted, a huge wind gust blew and slammed the door screen on Gabe's behind so hard he flew 20 feet into the house. What a cool coincidence, I thought. Only much later would I realize that it wasn't a coincidence at all. The weather forecast had predicted sunny weather for our beach trip, but as we drove to the beach, the conditions got worse and worse. First, it started raining, and then the wind picked up. And finally, by the time we got to our rental cabin, it was a full-fledged hurricane. This makes no sense, said Mom. There's always advance warning of weather like this. We hunkered down and ate popcorn while listening to the cabin shake. Suddenly, there was a knock at the door. Who'd be knocking on our door in a hurricane? I said. Mom opened the door, and standing there soaking wet was Grover. Oh my God, I thought. His stalking has truly reached epic proportions. Mom, don't let him in, I said. Shut the door and call 911. But instead, she said, Hey, Grover, and ushered him in. Wait, how did my mom know Grover? Then I noticed something was different about Grover. Where his sneakers used to be, there were now hooves. Mom handed Grover a towel. What are you doing here? She said. I've been searching all over for Percy, he said. Mom looked at me anxiously. Did something strange happen at school that you didn't tell me about? She said. Yeah, this weird dude with horns and hooves who eats grass started stalking me, I said. Besides that, she said. I told her about the fight with Mrs. Dodds and seeing the old women knitting the underwear and cutting the thread, and my mom's mouth dropped open. Get to the car, she said. Now! She grabbed Grover and me, and we ran out to the car. Mom, why are we bringing him? I asked, pointing at Grover. Shouldn't we be using the car to get away from him? I'll explain later, she said. Hurry, Percy, you're in danger. Of course I'm in danger, I said. There's a freaking calf goat here. Mom insisted that both Grover and I sit in the front seat with her, so I couldn't avoid looking at Grover's hooves. I also noticed that he smelled like a petting zoo that hadn't been cleaned in a long time. Dude, why'd you never tell me about this? I asked. Well, if you'd known, you might have let me be your friend, he said. And I need to be friends with you so I can protect you from bad things. Well, at least I know why he pronounced bad that way. So is there a term for what you are? I asked. Mutant, circus freak, genetic abomination? I'm a satyr, he said. You know, from Mr. Brunner's class. I never did any of the reading, I said. He discussed them all the time in lecture, said Grover. I never listened to any of the lectures, I said. Grover rolled his eyes. A satyr is a half-man, half-goat from Greek mythology. Okay, I said. So, what does this have to do with you? Like I said, I'm a satyr, he said. Oh, great. So now this guy thought he was a character from Greek mythology? Mom, I really think the best call here would be to head to the mental hospital so we can dump off Mythology Man. No stops, said Mom. We need to get you to safety. Safety from what? I said. Oh, nothing much, said Grover. Just an army of thousands of monsters sent after you by Hades, god of the underworld. Don't say his name aloud, said Mom. I didn't know which was more disturbing. The fact that the guy next to me thought we were being chased by monsters sent by Hades, or the fact that my mom believed him. He must have brainwashed her, I thought. Or had she brainwashed him? And one thing I knew for sure was that Mom was doing 95 miles down a treacherous road in the middle of a hurricane. Where are we going? I asked. It's the place your father always wanted to send you, she said. My father wanted to send me somewhere? It was the first time I ever heard of it. What kind of place is it? I asked. Mom exchanged a look with Grover. It's, a summer camp, she said. Yeah, right. I knew what summer camp meant. Summer school. I guess Mom was concerned about me losing my scholarship after all. Mom, summer school is based on a faulty premise, I said. If a kid isn't able to concentrate during the school year, how's the kid supposed to concentrate when it's 80 degrees and sunny outside? Please, dear, just trust me, said Mom. You need to go to this place because you're in danger. Just because some old ladies cut some thread? Those weren't old ladies, said Grover. They were the Fates. The who? The Fates are the 3 Greek goddesses who determine human destiny, he said. They only appear when someone's about to die. Okay, this guy was now certifiably nutty, and at the moment Mom didn't seem to be too far behind. I began to consider whether I could survive jumping out of the car at full speed, but I didn't get a chance to decide because a bolt of lightning struck the car and we skidded off the ditch. It rolled into a ditch. When the car finally came to a stop, Grover fell into my lap with a big bump on his head. Oh, this is bad. Oh, he groaned. Percy, you need to get out of here, said my mom, who was stuck behind the steering wheel, which had bent in the crash. I tried the doors, but neither of them would open. Then through the rear window, I saw a man approaching us from the road. But there was something odd about him. He was wearing a bull mask, a really realistic one. Mom, what's a guy with a really realistic bull mask doing out here, walking in a hurricane? I asked. Mom looked and saw the man, and her face filled with horror. Percy, smash the window and run for it! She yelled. There's a farmhouse behind that big tree on the hill. Just run there and don't look back. I'm not leaving you, I said. Why are you so worried about this guy with a mask? He's probably just walking off after partying a little too hard. Percy, that's no guy, said Mom. That's the Minotaur. Minotaur? Now that term I recognized, because I'd seen a fantasy movie once with a Minotaur in it. A Minotaur was a man with the head of a bull. Mom, I think you've gone to shock and aren't thinking straight, I said. Just relax, and I'll ask the guy if he can help us out. Percy, no! I kicked out the window, climbed out of the car, and walked up to the guy. What up, bro? I said. Hey, looks like someone had a few hurricanes to celebrate the hurricane. Am I right? The guy's nostrils flared, and he let out a giant roar. Whoa, whoa, whoa! Don't blame me because you couldn't find anyone to take home, I said. Hey, you look like a strong guy. Any chance you could give me a hand pushing our car out of this ditch? The bull guy roared again, then got down on all fours and started pawing the ground, like an actual bull getting ready to charge. I realized my estimate of a few hurricanes might have been a little too conservative. You know what? Forget I even asked, I said. Nice meeting you. Get home safely! I turned and started walking back to the car, but a second later, I heard a loud thump, 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 thump. I turned around just in time to see the bull guy charging towards me, his horns aimed directly at my chest. Instinctively, I tried to jump out of the way, and landed on the bull guy's shoulders, straddling his head. The bull guy started bunking to try to throw me off, like we were in a rodeo. My fingers began to slip from his neck, and knew that in seconds I'd be thrown off, and there'd be no rodeo clown around to help me. So I got scared, which of course led me to fart. And this was no ordinary fart. It was more like a rocket fart, an explosive burst of gas that propelled me up into the air and sent the bull guy hurtling away at what seemed like supersonic speed. A second later, the bull guy slammed into the tree and disintegrated into powder, just like Mrs. Dodds had at the museum. I stumbled back to the car in a daze, and I was shocked to see that my mom had turned very pale and had a big wound on her head from the accident I noticed before. Mom, I'm back! I cried. Don't worry, I'll get you help. It's too late, she said weakly. Just remember that I love you, Percy. No! Stay with me, Mom! Will always love you. And then she was gone. Not dead gone, though. Like, actually gone. There was a flash of golden light, and she just disappeared. It was all too confusing. I needed to go get help. I remembered what Mom had said about the farmhouse beyond the tree, and I picked up Grover and headed for it. But I didn't really want to take Grover with me, but I knew if I didn't take him, he eventually just stalked me anyway. Chapter 4. I meet a grumpy guy who thinks he's a god. The next thing I remember was I was lying on a soft bed, being spoon-fed by a really pretty blonde girl. The stuff she was feeding me looked like pudding, but tasted like buttered popcorn. It could have tasted like rotten eggs for all I cared, because she was hot. I racked my brain and came up with a great opening line, but when I tried to speak, my mouth barely moved. I must have been on pain medication or something, so instead of smooth lines that swept the girl off her feet, all that came out was, like, do up your corn. Shh, don't strain yourself, said the girl. You need to recover before the summer solstice deadline so you can help us. Good grief. Her with the summer solstice deadline too? Wasn't anyone in the world normal anymore besides me? But I didn't really care how nuts she was, because she was hot. Yes. Solstice deadline. Important, I said, and fell back to sleep. I woke up on the porch of a large house overlooking a meadow. Unfortunately, instead of the hot blonde, Grover was now with me, wearing a bright orange t-shirt that said, Camp Halfwit. Thanks for saving my life last night, said Grover. I thought the least I could do in return was go back and get you a little keepsake from your battle with the Minotaur. He handed me a small box, and I opened it to reveal the bull guy's New York State driver's license. He was wearing his bull mask in the picture, and turns out his real name was Frank Minotaurski. Thanks, I said, and put the box down on the table. I noticed that next to the box was a glass of what looked like apple juice. I picked it up and took a sip. It was definitely not apple juice. In fact, it was something way better. It tasted exactly like my mom's fresh baked chocolate chip cookies. I grabbed Grover by the collar and started shaking him. You stole my mom's recipe for chocolate chip cookies and made a drink out of it! I shouted. And then you had her killed so she wouldn't sue you! No, Percy. It's called nectar, said Grover. It tastes different for everybody. Like whatever your favorite food is. Oh, my bad, I said letting it go. So, what's it taste like for you? Grass, he said. And, once in a while, dirt. I drank some more. Whoa, easy there, said Grover. You, don't want to have more than a couple sips of that stuff. But I already chugged the entire glass. What's the problem? I said. You basically just ate 187 chocolate chip cookies, he said. As soon as he said it, I began to feel more nauseous than I ever felt in my whole life. Grover started walking away and beckoned for me to follow. Come on, he said. I got to introduce you to the camp director. Director? Sounded like someone important. I just hoped I could keep from throwing up on him. As we turned the corner of the house, I caught my breath. It looked like there was a summer camp going on in the middle of ancient Greece. There were a bunch of white marble buildings with huge columns, and kids doing summer camp activities like archery, volleyball, and swimming. Yikes, I thought. What kind of weirdos would build this place? It was even more disturbing when I noticed that a bunch of the kids had horns and hooves just like Grover. Percy, you're awake, a familiar voice said. I turned and saw Mr. Brunner in his wheelchair at the porch. He was playing cards with a chubby guy in a Hawaiian shirt and a hot blonde girl who'd spoon-fed me. Mr. Brunner? You're here too? Actually, my real name is Kyron, he said. Mr. Brunner was just the identity I assumed, so I could work at Yancey and see if you were Camp Halfwit material. Hold on. You only taught Yancey because you wanted to observe me? I said. Do you think I like being surrounded by kids all day? He said. Do you think any teacher does? It seemed like every minute I was finding out something new about these people that made them seem crazier. Assuming false identities, taking jobs just to recruit people into their group. This was serious whack-a-cult stuff going on. I couldn't believe I drank their cookie juice so freely. I really need to be more careful. Percy, I believe you've met Annabeth, said Kyron, pointing at the hot blonde girl. Oh, yes, I had. I knew I dug a bit of a hole in my first interaction with her, so it was time to go to work. Sup, girl? I said, something over to her. Not sure if you heard, but last night I killed the Minotaur. What do you say we roll out here, and I can tell you about a pizza? If you kids do leave the grounds, can you stop by the store and pick me up a bottle of Chardonnay? It was the chubby guy in the Hawaiian shirt. He was holding out a $20 bill. Kyron snatched the 20 away. Mr. D, you know you're not allowed to have any wine, said Kyron. You mean I'm not allowed to have any fun? Said the chubby guy. Percy, be our camp director, Mr. D. Welcome to Camp Dimwit, said Mr. D unenthusiastically. Halfwit, said Kyron. Whatever, said Mr. D. Mr. D, how about we get back to our pinochle game, said Kyron. Oh, goody, said Mr. D, picking up his cards. Pinochle is so fun. It's way more fun than drinking wine. Excuse me, but what is this place? I said. And why did you pick me to be here? We scout schools all over the world and watch for students who seem to be special, said Kyron. Your badness in schoolwork exceeded that of all exceeded that of all other humans we'd ever seen in 3,000 years of scouting. It made us suspect that you might be something other than human. Other than human? I said. The crazy of these people was going off the charts. Percy, did your mom not tell you anything? Said Kyron. The only thing she told me was that this was a summer camp, which I knew really meant summer school. Kyron laughed and shook his head. Well, it's time for you to learn the truth, he said. Camp Halfwit is a training camp for kids who are half-gods. Half... What? I said. Gods, said Kyron. You know, like Zeus, Hera, Apollo. One of your parents, your mom, was a human, and the other was a god. That makes you a half-god. Good one, I said. No, really, what is this place? I wasn't joking, said Kyron. We train you here to use your divine powers. At the moment, you don't know how to use them at all, which is why we call you a half-wit. Oh, come on, I said. I'm a half-god. You can't tell me you actually believe this. They all just stared at me. Guys, I hate to burst your bubble, I said. But gods aren't real. They're just the invention of people who are trying to explain natural occurrences they have no control over. Thunder roared, and the ground shook. The gods appear to disagree with you, said Mr. D. See? This is exactly what I'm talking about, I said. Thunder is a totally natural occurrence, but you're using this made-up idea of a god to explain it. It thundered even more loudly. Watch. Now you're going to do it again, I said. Mr. D's cheeks turned red with anger. I can't take these kids anymore, he grumbled. I need a drink. Mr. D waved his hand, and a goblet appeared out of thin air. He then snapped his fingers, and the goblet started filling up with wine. Kyron gave me a look. Still skeptical? He said. Ooh, a magic trick with wine, I said. I'm so convinced there are gods now. Mr. D lifted the goblet to take a sip, but Kyron took it away. Mr. D, your restrictions, said Kyron. Mr. D rolled his eyes and reluctantly waved his hand again, and the glass of wine turned into a can of Diet Coke. Kyron gave it back to him. I think I'm gonna cry, said Mr. D. Why isn't he allowed to have wine? I asked. Because you gotta see why. Chariot driving under the influence, said Kyron. Mr. D caused a big accident and destroyed several cumulonimbus clouds. Now he's acting as camp director as a way of fulfilling his 15,000 hours of community service. Hold on. Are you saying he's a god? I said, pointing at Mr. D. Kyron nodded. Who is he? Drunkos? God of getting loaded? Thunder rumbled again. Kyron buried his head in his hands. See, this is why I wish you'd done your reading, he said. Don't you remember in class how we talked about a god associated with wine? I nodded, not wanting to admit I didn't. Okay, so which god is Mr. D? Mr. D, said Kyron, giving me a little hint. D. Sorry, the nectar is giving me a brain freeze, I said. Can you give me another hint? Die, said Kyron. Die. Oh, said Kyron. Dio. My brain's still freezing. Nye, said Kyron. Dionai! I shouted. He's Dionai, the god of wine! Thunder roared again. No, Percy. He's Dionysus, said Kyron. You're sure doing a fine job teaching these students, said Mr. D. Hang on, I said. If Mr. D is a god, what's he doing in America? Shouldn't he be in Greece or in the sky or something? Many of the gods are right here in America, said Kyron. Just look around and you'll see the signs. For instance, what's the symbol of America? An eagle. The same eagle that's the symbol of Zeus. And how do you think Greek yogurt completely took over the American yogurt market in less than 2 years? Do you really think all that happened naturally? Well, if there are gods, then why? Pardon me, said Mr. D. I'd love to keep listening to this debate about whether I exist, but I need to speak to Grove about his performance as Percy's keeper. And then I'm going back to lock myself in my room and imagine I'm no longer working here. Kyron, would you please show Percy to his bunk in cabin 11? Right away, said Kyron. Then, much to my surprise, he rose up out of his wheelchair. But even more surprising was when I saw the blanket that had been covering Kyron's horse legs fell off. The lower half of Kyron's body was the body of a horse. He was even a bigger freak than Grover. Kyron noticed me staring. Yes, Percy, he said. I'm a centaur. Half man, half horse. What's with all the half men, half some other animal? I said. Are there no other possibilities for creatures? How about dividing them into thirds? Half man, half iPod. Whoever's making these things, stop being so lazy and start showing a little creativity. The loudest thunder yet rumbled. Let's go, Percy, before you get us all vaporized, said Kyron, and he led me off to the cabins. Chapter 5. I'm rescued by a very stinky friend. As I walked with Kyron through the camp, it seemed like everywhere I looked, someone was milking a satyr. What's with all the satyr milking? I said. We use the milk to make satyr cheese, which we then pass off as goat cheese and sell at an enormous profit, said Kyron. It pays all our expenses. Aren't you worried someone will find out? I said. Nah, said Kyron. I'm much more worried about how they'll discover we're selling centaur sweat as apple juice. Eventually, we arrived at the cabins. There were 12 of them, arranged in the shape of a U. There's one cabin for each of the 12 major Greek gods, said Kyron. Every halfway lives in the cabin belonging to his or her godparent. As I glanced at the various cabins, I noticed that all the kids hanging out in front of each cabin looked like each other, which made sense, since they all shared a parent. I pointed at one of the cabins where the kids looked kind of Asian. Hey, in that cabin, all the kids look part Asian, I said. But which of the 12 gods is Asian? None of them, said Chiron. That cabin belongs to Apollo, the god of light. He, kind of has a thing for Asian women. How about that cabin? I said, pointing to a cabin where all the kids were really geeky looking and had their heads buried in books. That's Hephaestus' cabin, said Chiron, or as we like to call him, no gamos, because he has no game with women. So the only girls he can get to date him are the nerdy girls no one else asks out. So which cabin am I in? Even though I didn't believe any of this, I was kind of interested to figure out what god they thought was my dad. You're in cabin 11, said Chiron, which belongs to Hermes, but it's also where we put all the undetermineds, kids whose godparent we haven't identified. So, you have no idea who my godparent is? I asked. Yeah. No idea whatsoever, said Chiron. Hey, look! There's Annabeth's cabin. Chiron quickly led me away from cabin 11 and walked me over to a cabin that looked like a sorority house. It was a gorgeous-looking building with Greek letters in the front and a beautiful lawn, and every girl hanging out there was smoking hot. Which god's house is that? I asked. Aphrodite, the goddess of love, said Chiron. Hey, you know what? I just remembered that Aphrodite is my godparent, I said. So I'll be living here instead of cab 11. Thanks! I began walking toward the front door, but after only a few steps, I felt something wrapped tight around my wrist. I looked down and saw that Chiron had lassoed me. As he was pulling me back, Annabeth came out of the cabin. Hey, Annabeth, said Chiron. I have to go teach advanced archery class. Would you mind showing Percy to his bunk in cabin 11? No prob, said Annabeth. Chiron galloped away, and Annabeth walked me back to cabin 11. I peered inside the window and saw that the place was absolutely packed. In addition to rows of beds, there were air mattresses and sleeping bags everywhere. Wow. Are that many kids undetermined? I said. No, said Annabeth. It's just that Hermes is, well, a bit of a player. Annabeth walked me inside, and all the kids looked up at me. Cabin 11, said Annabeth. Meet your new resident, Percy Stinkson. Everyone laughed at my name. Then a guy who was a bit older than the rest and wearing a Camp Halfwit staff t-shirt stepped forward. Now, campers. Just because his name is hilarious doesn't mean we should laugh at it, he said. This is Luke, your counselor at cabin 11, said Annabeth. You're lucky. He's one of my favorite counselors. It was totally obvious she had a crush on him. Great. The path to dating her just got about 1,000 miles longer. Nice to meet you. Nice to meet you, Percy, said Luke. As you can see, we're pretty crowded at the moment, so just find a space wherever. What? Why did they put all the undetermined kids in Hermes' cabin if Hermes has so many kids already? I asked. Hermes is the god of traveling. That is, of anything that involves going from place to place, said Luke. Since you're traveling to Camp Halfway from the outside world, Hermes is the proper god to welcome you. Hey, who's that smell? Said one of the kids. Ew, who farted? Said another. Everyone turned and looked at me. Sorry, I said. I get nervous meeting new people. Annabeth grabbed my wrist and quickly began leading me out the door. My apologies for dragging Percy away, said Annabeth, but he's got to go to that thing he has to go to right now. Bye! As soon as we were outside, she turned at me, looking displeased. Stinkson, are you serious? What? I said. Letting one loose in a crowded room, she said. And I thought you were the one. Well, you know what they say. First impressions are always right, I said. How about we grab dinner and a movie tonight and I can prove it to you? Not that kind of one, she said. I meant the one who's going to save the universe from being destroyed. After all, you did kill the Minotaur. You mean Frank Minotaurski? I said. Come on, Annabeth. You can't tell me you actually believe all this gods and monster stuff. Zeus, Hermes, the Minotaur. It's all made up. Thunder roared. I rolled my eyes. Okay, enough of the fake thunder already. It's getting old. Thunder roared again. Oh my god, is there anything I can't say without thundering? Thunder roared again. If you thunder, you're a loser. No thunder. Gotcha! A lightning bolt hit 6 inches away from me. Percy, everything we're telling you is true, said Annabeth. Want even more proof? If you weren't part god, the nectar wouldn't have worked on you and tasted like chocolate chip cookies. It would have just tasted like the Sayer boogers it's made out of. I felt like I was gonna fart. Well, 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 said a husky voice. Fresh meat. I looked over and saw a tall, muscular girl walking toward me with several large girls from behind her. Ugh, said Annabeth. It's Clarice and the other girls from the cabin of Ares, the god of war. So, Poopsie, did Annabeth tell you about our initiation ceremony for newcomers? Said Annabeth. It's Percy, I said, but Clarice wasn't listening. Instead, she and her friends were dragging me into the girls' bathroom. I was actually kind of excited about this, because I'd always wanted to see what a girl's bathroom looked like. Would there be, like, flowers and kittens everywhere? I was disappointed to see that it looked pretty much like the boys' bathroom. And I was even more disappointed when I found out the initiation ceremony involved sticking my head in the toilet. Clarice's friends would laugh as she held my head inches away from the toilet water. Okay, I said. I'm ready for the part of the ceremony where you let me go and say, welcome to the club, and there's a big party in my honor. You got the wrong club. You got the wrong club, said Clarice. The only club you'll be joining today is the Dunked in Toilet Water Club. The girls all laughed, and Clarice pushed my head down into the water. I closed my eyes and waited for the disgusting wetness, but it never came. Instead, I got this weird tingling feeling. And then I farted. But this fart wasn't invisible like farts usually are. It was a cloud of gas, in the shape of a man. The fart man took a deep breath and blew a stream of fart gas directly into the clear faces of Clarice and her friends. Ugh, I can't breathe, said Clarice, and she and her friends ran out of the bathroom gagging. The fart man offered me a fist bump, and I returned it, which I realized wasn't such a good idea afterwards when I smelled my hand. Then he waved goodbye and wafted out the window. I turned to leave and saw Annabeth standing in the doorway, mouth open in shock. She'd seen the whole thing. How did you? She said. I didn't do anything, I said. She just kept staring at me. What? I said. What are you thinking? I'm thinking, she said, that I want that guy on my team for Color War.